Cruising is unlike anything else. Our 3 cruise lines travel to every corner of the globe, providing exceptional guest experiences to see, understand, and appreciate the world from a whole new perspective. It's at the heart of what we do. The future of our business is dependent on the beauty and wonder of our planet.
Our Sail and Sustain program is our commitment to cruising responsibly and protecting the oceans we love. We focus on making a real difference both at sea and on shore, because cruising depends on healthy oceans and thriving communities. It's how NCLH shows guests, employees, and investors that we are serious about reducing our footprint, creating value for our investors, meeting global sustainability goals, and staying ahead of regulations.
Thank you for joining us. We have a lot to talk about tonight, and I'm sure you all would much rather listen to Elizabeth and Kerry than to me, so I'm going to get things rolling here. But first, we have to thank our sponsors, because without our sponsors, this event wouldn't be possible. So a big thank you to Norwegian Cruise Lines as our presenting sponsor. Our supporting sponsors are the Shepherd Broad Foundation, Bill Galway, KB Life Enhancement Forum, Key Biscayne Community Foundation, the Joan McCann Family Foundation, Nicole and Myron Wang, and Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. At the midway, we're at the midway part, where we've done 2 Sea Secrets. We've got 2 to go for this season. Thank you all that have been here, but a big special thank you. This event wouldn't be possible without our outreach coordinator, Katie Eaton, lots of students, graduate students that helped set up, and our facilities and our security, campus safety, that help make your experience a pleasant one. So thank you to the team for helping us put all this together. So tonight, we are all super excited to bring you a very special, different format in conversation event featuring two remarkable storytellers who know how to make complex science and global events just feel immediate and human. So our moderator this evening is Kerry Sanders, who Kerry is an award-winning journalist with more than 40 years of experience reporting from the field on breaking news, extreme weather, environmental stories, and so much more. For 32 years, he served as NBC News' Miami-based correspondent, contributing regularly to the NBC Nightly News, Today Show, and MSNBC. Over the course of his regularly scheduled career, over the course of his career, he covered more than 100 named storms, including Andrew, Katrina, and Irma, and reported from major global events and natural disasters, earning Peabody, Emmy, and Edward R. Murrow Awards. Many people also remember Kerry for moments when journalism met humanity, including his live reporting after Hurricane Irma that turned into the rescue of 2 stranded dolphins. Now retired from NBC News, Kerry continues his passion for storytelling and the ocean as host and reporter for Destination Dive on the Discovery Channel. Please welcome Kerry Sanders. You can go that way. Tonight, our featured guest is Elizabeth Kolbert. Not Colbert, Kolbert. One of the most influential voices in writing about science and the environment today. Elizabeth has been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 1999 and is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Sixth Extinction, which won the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction, Under a White Sky, The Nature of the Future, and Field Notes from a Catastrophe. Elizabeth's work is known for making complex scientific ideas both accessible and urgent, exploring climate change, extinction, and humanity's growing influence on the planet. She's the recipient of numerous honors, including the Heinz Award for the Environment, and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her newest book, Life on a Little-Known Planet, continues her exploration of Earth at a pivotal moment in its history, and we're delighted to have her here tonight in conversation with Kerry Sanders. Please welcome Elizabeth.
So as Elizabeth comes up, I want to make sure that everybody remembers her name, and we're not going to say Colbert. So together, let's say her name. It is Elizabeth Kolbert. There we go.
I so appreciate that. It's so rare that people...
And as you may or may not know, he actually turned his last name into a joke. That's not even how he pronounced his last name.
It's a joke, absolutely.
So we heard a little bit about your background, and I've got obviously some of your books up here. Let's talk for how you got from where you are today, where you started on this journey of reporting, writing, and then ultimately, I'm curious, was the environmental reporting always part of your destination?
You know, on some level, I always did want to be a journalist. I edited the high school newspaper, and there's a quote that's variously attributed to, interestingly enough, William Faulkner and Stephen King, which is an interesting combination. That, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but I write to find out what I think, and I think to me, writing has always been a way to make sense of experience, and even as a kid, but I guess I didn't have enough, sort of imagination to become a fiction writer, so I've always been interested in journalism. But I actually got my start, I was, says a Marine component, I was spent a year after college studying in Germany, in Hamburg, and my first piece of real journalism that ended up in a real newspaper was about eel soup. That was, and it's been a very long and winding road. I actually covered politics for quite a while for the New York Times, and then I went to the New Yorker, and I was still covering politics. I wrote a column about City Hall for a while. When Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York, that was quite something. And but what really happened was that I ended up writing a 3-part series on climate change back in 2004, I guess, and that really changed my trajectory in life.
And so when you were working with politics, and now you are dealing with the environment, did you realize the mesh that would take place here?
Well, it is, I mean, on some level, everything is politics, so it is kind of helpful to have a background in politics, because politics, as we are now seeing, permeates, everything.
So the reason I love journalism is the adventure. And actually, I sometimes explain the best day that you have in school is the day that you have a field trip. And I think as a reporter, you get a chance to be on a field trip every day. You jump into other people's lives. And clearly with the way you write, we know that we are on an adventure with you. We are observing and feeling your observations. I'm first kind of curious in just your general sense of adventure. Is that what this is about for you in many ways, that you are going off on this incredible adventure?
Well, as I say, I covered politics for a long time, which is not, quite as adventurous. I spent a long time in Albany, New York, covering the state capitol. But I think, and I see this from my own kids now, who are kind of really grappling with what they want to do with their lives and what kind of jobs they hope to do, that I really, I guess the way I look at it is I never wanted a real job, and I was extremely lucky I have almost never, even when I was covering the state budget in the capital of New York, felt like, oh, this is a chore, this is something that I've done again already. And I think that is, for me, the great attraction of journalism. You're always learning something. You basically are still a student. I've just been a student for my whole life.
So one of the things that I want to compliment you on is, beyond the trade of journalism, you have a unique skill as a writer. And I want to differentiate the difference between being a reporter and sharing facts and writing. And so I'm just going to read one little paragraph, which I think helps us understand the difference between taking a complicated subject and reporting it versus trying to really make it as a writer would do. So when an organism expires, its genetic material begins to break down, so that instead of long strands of DNA, what's left under the best of circumstances are fragments. Trying to figure out how all the fragments fit together might be compared to trying to reassemble a Manhattan telephone book from pages that have been put through a shredder, mixed and with yesterday's trash, and left to rot in the landfill. So first of all, bravo. That's just exceptional writing. And there we go. We have some people in the audience. There's a few people in the audience who are wondering what a phone book is. I see some young people up here, but the rest of us know. As somebody who tries to explain complicated science, simplify it, but not get it wrong, where does something like that come from?
Well, I am often asked, about, my own. Sometimes people actually address me as a scientist, which is super embarrassing. But like, how do I get my scientific background? And the fact is, I have no scientific background. I studied literature in college, and I took one physics class, and I still remember the final. This is, a long time ago. I'm not going to tell you exactly how long ago. But the physics final, the final exam, involved an ant walking across a turntable, and you had to do something with the angular momentum, and I had no idea what to do with it. And that was the end of my scientific career. And so I am always trying to write for a person like me who has basically some high school science background, but not a sophisticated scientific background. And so that is really, and then you think, well, you have to paint, and also you're giving words, not in one of the big differences about writing about science and doing science is you do science in numbers and you write about science, in words. And those are very, very different things.
So do you assume that the person who's reading this needs that help, that they don't understand the basics of science, even if they had it in high school?
I assume that they are an interested non-specialist. And there are many scientists in this room who know that even scientists don't write for each other as a broad audience. They write for people in their fields. And so there's this huge chasm between the public and what gets printed in a scientific publication. So I often sort of describe myself as a translator. I try to translate what people are doing, into English. Yeah.
So do you have moments where you're with a scientist, and I'm sure there's none here,
Yeah.
who explain to us as reporters, and you don't get it? And you have to say, repeat it again, break it down.
Oh my God, yeah, all the time. And one of the great things about these adventures that I have had is I often spend days with people out in the field, so I can ask the same question over and over and over again. They get really, really sick of me. Everyone gets sick of me at the end of it. But the toughest story I ever did, which is actually not in any of these books, was on the Large Hadron Collider, which is in Switzerland, and that involved particle physics, and there were things that I simply couldn't understand. There was just absolutely no way I was going to understand them. But you still had to try to convey it to people in a way, once again, in English, and you sort of get to the point where you understand things well enough to put them into words, but there would be no way that I could, read the actual, scientific arguments.
Well, I applaud you on your writing because it is remarkable. So kind of near and dear to our hearts here, those of us in South Florida, are corals. And you have reported on that. In fact, I want to note that before the marine heat wave in 2003, you had been looking into corals. And one of the quotes in your book I have is, it may also be possible one day to create a drive for corals that would push a gene for heat tolerance. And so earlier today, we actually were in a lab where they were working on just that, corals that would actually be able to withstand. So kind of prescient on your part, but that's as a reporter listening. Where is it that, as a reporter, you are listening to what people have to say, but not overpromising what potentially could be? Because, as you know, there are people who love to hype out what they're doing.
Well, I guess it gets a little bit back to, my years covering politics. I think that you can, even scientists, as you point out, are prone to, and I think most scientists do try to be, pretty realistic about what they're doing. But everyone is enthusiastic about what they're doing, and your job as a reporter is to talk to a lot of people who are skeptics, people who are, believe that X or Y can happen, and people who are skeptical of it. And that particular, idea of a gene drive, which we can talk about gene drive if people want, where you would push a gene out there. You'd have to identify a gene for heat tolerance, and then you'd have to engineer this very complicated gene drive mechanism in the coral's own genes. And I'm not sure anyone has even attempted that yet, but I would be very interested if someone in the audience can contradict me.
So on your adventures, you've had an opportunity to meet some notable people. One of them, Ruth Gates. So some in the audience will absolutely know this name. Others will not. So let's assume that there are those who do not know Ruth Gates. Explain, first of all, who she was, and this seems to be a very critical relationship that you developed in terms of your reporting.
So Ruth was a great kind of larger-than-life character. She was running a marine biology station in Hawaii when I met her, and she had, I honestly don't know if she'd come up with this idea, but she and a colleague of hers in Australia had gotten some money to do a project, an assisted evolution for corals. It became known as the Super Coral Project. And I read about it. I just read about it and called up Ruth and ended up going out to Hawaii and spending a while out there with her. And the idea behind this, which is being pursued, right here in Miami, is that, corals, they don't necessarily, they when they spawn, you get a million different genetic variants, but you don't necessarily get the best ones. You don't necessarily get the best, most vibrant species that can withstand heat tolerance. Could we push them towards heat tolerance by very carefully doing crosses of different species, perhaps from different reefs, wouldn't naturally hook up, as it were, and then propagate those very tough, resilient corals and reseed reefs that, as you all know, are doing really terribly. And right now, we were just meeting with Andrew this morning. There's really fascinating work going on there. But that project, I think, was really Ruth's idea. And she was the kind of person who could sort of talk you into anything. And so she talked some funders into funding that.
So we do actually see this. I think most of the room understands that there's the Honduran coral and the Florida coral, and we actually see some outplanting and some success here from the University of Miami. I'm curious, the adventure that you have in terms of, are you jumping in the water? Are you down there? Are you just looking them in a lab? And is it always a comfortable setting at a 5-star hotel?
Well, in the case of Ruth, this was, we jumped in the water, absolutely, and it's hard to take notes underwater. That's a real problem for a reporter. I don't know how you deal with that. But I had a slate. They gave me like a dive slate, which was really cool, so I could take notes underwater. So we definitely jumped in the water for that. And definitely not staying in 5-star hotels. I've slept in these horrible hammocks. If you've been on a sort of, rainforest expedition, you sleep in these hammocks. They're sort of shaped like a banana, and they have a cover because it's going to rain on you. And so it's really like being in a coffin. And I'm kind of claustrophobic, so I hate it. But that's the kind of thing you do sign up for when you sign up for some of these expeditions.
Now, you are generally alone, or you're traveling with other reporters or cameramen?
I am almost always alone as the only reporter, but one of the great privileges of what I've done is gone out with people who really, really know what they're doing. So I've gotten to go to some amazing places that I would never have the nerve to go on my own, but with people who have very carefully planned expeditions and just very generously taken.
And let's talk about that. Planning an expedition. Yeah. You don't just show up gear is of course important. Tell me the extreme environments and how you prepare for it.
How I prepare for it?
Yeah. Whether you're going to be at sea with 8-foot seas or whether you're going to be in a jungle where I'm not sure what bug just bit me.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I'm underprepared in that way. generally trust the people that I'm going with. Some of them have been, fairly strenuous, so, you try to be in shape. We're at 13,000 feet, that can be tough. But a couple summers ago, I was on the top of the Greenland ice sheet, for example. That's about as extreme as I've been. But you get outfitted. The U.S. government, the NSF, makes sure that you don't go there, in your pullover. So they have a whole huge warehouse full of gear that you just borrow. So I've always been very, very, fortunate to have huge, massive preparations that other people have done that I sort of glom onto.
So one thing we're all going to leave here with tonight, is a word that's not part of my vocabulary and maybe not part of the normal vocabulary, but a word that you would like to see enter our vocabulary. So, Anthropocene. Let me have you say it properly, because I'm sure I just messed it up, and then define it and why you think you'd like to see that in our vocabulary.
So you pronounce it correctly if you're an American, Anthropocene. If you're a Brit, you would say Anthropocene. So there's a sort of tomato thing there going on there. But the Anthropocene is a term actually that was first put into circulation by a Dutch chemist who is best known for having done crucial work to discover that we were destroying the ozone layer. And he won a Nobel Prize for that in the 90s. And he, the way he described it, and he once described it to me, he's now passed away, unfortunately, is it just sort of came to him that we technically, those of you who study geology, technically we live in the Holocene, which is basically the 12,000 years since the last ice age ended. But do we really? What defines a geological epoch? Well, human impacts really define our epoch. And I don't think there is, in geological circles, this is still debated, and it has not been formally adopted. It's a huge and very vicious debate, actually. You didn't realize that stratigraphers were so vicious, but they are. But in sort of scientific circles in general, I don't think there's any debate that we are not the greatest force on the planet right now. Humans are clearly changing the planet on a scale and at a rate that is rivaled only at moments of global crisis, huge global crisis in the past, like the asteroid impact that occurred 66 million years ago. So we are living, in interesting times, not just humanly, but geologically. And that term is definitely not going away because our impacts are only going to be growing.
Does that mesh then back with your political reporting when you talk about the times we're living in?
In a way, yes, it all comes together. I mean, I think that's been really the most sort of, one of the most fascinating and impactful personally for me aspects of what I've been reporting about over the last 20 years or so is that understanding that the times that we're living in, which seem on some level, nowadays they seem pretty eventful, but on some level they seem, it's very ordinary. We all drive around, we all fly around, we all do these things that seem very ordinary to us, but that they are in a history of the planet-like way extremely, they're unprecedented. We live in geologically unprecedented times, and that is a sort of stunning realization.
So if we reference back to Ruth Gates for a moment, she was a glass half full. You have not been concentrating on one particular event, but by the very nature of reporting, you're looking at many different things. Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Is there a balance here? Because I think when people read, they want to know what's going on, they want to understand the depths of the problems, but they don't want to be left with, and I don't know whether this is a challenge because you don't want to lie to your readers, but you want to be hopeful.
Well, I mean, you've sort of gotten at the heart of the matter, and I wrote a book called Ages for Hope, and but as I told people afterwards, that was kind of a joke. I think it's hard to be hopeful right now. I mean, I think if you're concerned about, the planet, If you're concerned about humanity's continued existence on this planet, I think it's also a pretty scary moment. I mean, what we're doing is, as I said, geologically unprecedented, and where that ends up, and there are many people in this room who are studying precisely that, but it's taking a pretty big roll of the dice, and a lot of things would have to work out extremely well for this to all end happily. I will defer to the scientists in the room for that, but there's a lot of damage baked in that there's just no getting out of the system at this point. And I don't think that's as well enough understood as it should be, because we're having, these amazingly inane debates. We are meeting here today on the day that the Trump administration has decided, climate change does not pose a danger to human health and welfare. And so it's just sort of a stunning moment.
And so I'm just curious, the challenge that I've always had with the reporting is, if the story is in the 50s versus to where we are now, I'll use corals again, we've gone from, a wonderful coral reefs, and today maybe at around 1% of what we had. My editors, my bosses would say, it's too depressing to bring this to the audience. You need to give me something that is hopeful, which is what many of the stories I did, where we went out and they're actually planting corals, and the corals are actually taking hold. I just was recently back out at the 100 Yards of Hope right off the key here, and it's thriving. It's doing amazingly well. That's a snapshot of a very small area compared to the reefs. Under pressure from your bosses, from those who are going to edit your copy and say, we're going to print this or not?
Well, I guess I've tried to thread that, you're absolutely right. I mean, people don't want the next, really depressing story about what we're doing to the planet. I think that I've tried to report on things that are interesting, and people who are interested, and people who are passionately interested in what they're doing. Is that going to be, and sometimes it is a Ruth Gates who, it was passionately optimistic about, as you said, a glass half full kind of person. And sometimes it's someone like James Hansen. I once did a profile of James Hansen, who's sort of considered the sort of father of global warming, who's profoundly pessimistic about the world. So stories can be interesting, I guess, in all sorts of different ways. And they're very often, because I write for a particular publication, very often they're driven by the interests of the person that I'm following around.
And are you reading those people's papers before you meet them? Are you trying to get through that sometimes very difficult language?
Yes, but fortunately every scientific paper has a, results section where they summarize what they found, because the actual steps in the process are very, very difficult often for a lay person to get through.
So I want you to take me on an adventure, because when I read this, I had never heard of this, and you and I have done a lot of this similar reporting, nothing to the depths. When you do a TV story, I'm lucky if it's 3.5 minutes. It's usually 2 minutes. I think my record was like 8 minutes. So it's unusual versus the space that you have. But I so enjoyed reading about the Great Auk, because I'd never heard about it. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know what it looked like. Take me through that story of how you started, what it was like physically getting there, et cetera.
So the Great Auk was a beautiful bird. There are many stuffed ones, or several stuffed ones, in natural history museums, about yay high. It was one of the very rare flightless birds in the northern hemisphere, and it was, from what we can gather, quite abundant until basically people started slaughtering it. And one of the interesting things about the Great Auk story is that it was a story of extinction in real time. People had become aware of extinction by this point, and they were literally watching the Great Auk go extinct in the 1840s, basically. And it's a terrible story. We have all sorts of records of the Great Auk would mate on these islands, and sailors would come through, and they would just slaughter them. They slaughtered them for their feathers. They slaughtered them to eat. They just wiped them out. And we actually have a record of the last ones that were ever seen, which were on this little island off of Iceland, which is just a chunk of rock. If you've flown into Reykjavik, you've probably seen it. It's a very weird looking chunk of rock. It looks like a column that got cut off at the top. And I spent a long time trying to get out there to tell this story, and no one ever goes there. And finally, I fortunately have an Icelandic friend, and his father was a minister in Iceland, and he found me one fisherman who was willing to take me out there if the weather was good. That was the deal. If the weather is good, we can go out there. And so we went out to this island, and thank goodness the weather was beautiful, and got out to this island that you can't step on it, it's protected, and saw where the last auks, this sort of lip of rock where the last auks were seen in, I think it was 1842 or 1844, I'm sorry, I can't remember. But it was a great trip, and it was to tell this story of people watching this coming into the knowledge that we were responsible for extinctions, which was a new concept at the time, and Charles Darwin even was kind of resistant to this idea that there was this sort of human-driven extinction going on.
And so when you're out there, share with me that feeling, because when I read it, I really felt like I was with you on the boat, wondering about, are we going to make it, what the seas are like, imploring somebody to please, let's keep going. And actually, you couldn't have gotten on the island even if you had permission, because it's too rough.
Yeah, it's a crazy. It's just a column of rock. It would have been almost suicidal. But to show you the lengths that people were willing to go to, it was a moment of this tremendous egg collecting fervor when the last ones were sighted. So these guys went out there, and they left, and we know who they were, 3 guys, we know their names, went out to this island to try to collect an auk egg for an egg collector back in England or somewhere. And they practically drowned. They had to throw one guy a rope because it was so hard to get on and off this island. Now, when we went, of course, they were rowing out there. When we went, I will confess, we went and we were, fueled by, diesel fuel. So it was a lot easier, and I didn't have to row. But it was a very melancholy. I mean, it was a beautiful day. I remember it very distinctly, and there are a lot of birds on there now. Now it sort of looks like it's rippling with birds, but there are no auks left. So it's a real breeding colony for birds because it's so safe. It's impossible for a predator to get out there.
And aside from a sketch or a picture, did you ever see even a stuffed one?
Oh yeah, I did. I saw one in Iceland in their Natural History Museum. They had a stuffed one, and there are other stuffed ones around. I think there's one in LA, and they're beautiful. They have these. They look sort of haughty. They have these beautiful sort of beaks that have a little sort of almost an incision and a little design in them, and they're black and white, and they're really, really beautiful birds. Were beautiful birds.
I'm going to just divert for a second. That never heard of the auk, but I did a story up off of the coast of Maine where the puffins were actually likely to follow the same path were it not for just one person who said, I'm going to try to save these, the puffins. And now we have seen the body of water around the Gulf of Maine is among the fastest rising temperatures, and that has impacted the puffins because the puffins feed on a size of a fish that is now deeper, and the puffin swims down. They can't get to it, so they have to go further away from land. So I guess I'm setting up is there are many similarities with different species, and I'm curious, when you look at that and you imagine where we're headed and what role we have to maybe change course, I'm going to speak for myself, and I've been on the front lines of this stuff. I often feel helpless. Now, getting the message out there is a big thing, and that's what you do. But do you tell people that there are ways that we can actually cause the change to go back versus just letting it go the way it is because it's such a big event, we can't control it?
Well, one thing I'll say is that puffins and auks are related. They're part of the same family. I always like to come to, important states, and because I think that, the key thing that people can do, and we always talk about things that we can all do in our own lives, which I do believe in. I do believe that doing things in our own lives is important, just as an example, not because any one person is going to, 1 person out of 8 billion. There is a limit to your impact, but if a state like Florida embraced environmental protection, took climate change seriously, which I would say, from my reporting, really ought to be happening, then I think that change comes in fits and starts, and then in waves. And right now we're in kind of an astonishing wave, in my opinion, of in one direction, and pushing things in a different direction. It should be possible. It seems very, 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 very difficult right now. But I think that the obvious only message I can give is to, stay engaged. And that means, literally, and as something as, I did cover politics, so I do know that this is true. 20 people bothering a congressperson makes a difference. It really does. They are listening, and they're worried about their constituents. So I do really urge people, even if it seems, hopeless, like this person doesn't agree with me, you're never going to get them to agree with me, 20, 50, 100 phone calls does get their attention.
And that's how the political system works, because if you're elected every 2 years and you hear this, it can be an outside voice.
Exactly.
Or outsized.
Exactly. And people really need to, the squeaky wheel unfortunately does get the grease, and people really need to be making noise, and no time more than right now.
So, of all these adventures, and I know you hate a question like this, your greatest adventure?
So my greatest adventure, I think it brings us back to coral reefs. I was on the Great Barrier Reef, and it was a project, and I was on a tiny little island, totally isolated little island, where there was a little research station, and the project involved going out right before and after low tide. And I went out, and you had to walk across the reef, and I went out one night in the middle of the night with some guy who didn't know where we were going. And it was a beautiful night, just a spectacular night. You'll never see stars like this anywhere near here. And but we got lost. We didn't know where we were, and the water, this was after low tide, so the water was now coming up. And that was my greatest adventure. And it was really an adventure.
Did you make it?
I know, I ruined the end of the story, didn't I, by still being here. But afterwards, after this kind of hair-raising experience, during which I want to say I stayed remarkably calm, given that we were definitely in a near-death experience. Someone told me, well, this stretch that we were walking over is also called Shark Alley, and there were a lot of sharks there, which fortunately I didn't know at the time. But it was in retrospect, it was, the sort of, apologies to my husband and my family, the most memorable night of my life. And it was really, I laugh about it now, but it was really quite the experience.
Are you in contact with people? Do you have a satellite phone? Or when you're in a remote place like this, where is the help?
There was no help. I mean, there were people on this island who, if they could have found us, but we were not in, often when you're out with people, they do have a sat phone or something. Yeah, but we did not have that. We should have.
And are your editors aware, like, you're off and hopefully they'll hear from you in 10 days? Or, I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. No one really, you're out there, and nowadays, there wouldn't have been on One Tree Island, but in many places there, it's crazy. When I first went up to the top of the Greenland ice sheet, which was like 20 years ago, that was it. You were not in communication. You were maybe in radio communication, and now there's internet. Now so everything is so wired now that it's actually hard to get away from being wired in. but no one really cares where I am. Fortunately, they care where the people I am with usually, so I sort of can piggyback on that.
But that takes us actually to a spot of where we are in our society today, where everybody is interconnected and everybody is, I want to say, unfortunately, living with a 8 to 15 second clip on a TikTok or on an Instagram. And you are the antithesis of that. Your deep reporting, your incredible writing, the adventure you're taking on, it's pages upon pages upon pages. Now, on the one hand, I do know that those who watch just bits of 8 to 15 seconds also surprisingly sit and watch a documentary on Netflix. But tell me about your readers in general. Do we have people who are today doing as they did 20 years ago, staying with you, reading through this?
Well, I'm gonna ask you all. I mean, I'm grateful to you all for being here. I think probably you are the type of people who do sit through an 8,000 word piece, but it is, I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely increasingly a challenge, and that's why, journalism in general, not just 8,000 word journalism, but anything that used to arrive, in a print form. Now, a lot of it's migrated online because the economic model is broken just for supporting that. But there's also the question of where's the next generation of readers, and Lord knows that's a huge issue.
And let's talk about environmental reporting, because you've really carved out kind of like the gold standard of what it is that others should try to emulate, whether it is in the written word or in another form to present it. Do you feel like every story next one is like it has to be the best?
Well, I do want to say that there's a lot of great reporting out there for people who are interested. There's a lot of people doing, really good environmental reporting. ProPublica, there's something called Heated, a newsletter. There's Inside Climate. So there's a lot of good reporting that you may not. People who are not really looking for it may not even have heard. But yeah, the stakes are high. And one of the reasons that the stakes are high, and this is a problem with climate change reporting, and I'm sure you dealt with this in your own career, is this story is not going anywhere. This story is going to just keep the flooding is going to get worse, but and the world's going to keep getting warmer. But editors are asking, and readers too, I think, are asking, well, tell me something new. Tell me something I don't know. So that, I think, makes the next story, finding what's the avenue into this story that my readers don't feel haven't already read.
And you did that with the Golden Frog in Panama. That's a story that I want you to relive this a little bit for us, because it's a remarkable story, and quite frankly, it's one that I think is one of those stories that was off radar, and probably still in many ways, despite your reporting, is still pretty much off radar, but it tells us a lot.
Yeah, so that's that story, which took me a long time to figure out how to get into that, which it's sort of what's called the amphibian crisis. Has everyone heard of the amphibian crisis? Yeah, I see some nodding. Yeah, so there was just this, sort of for a long time, quite mysterious disappearance, just very, very rare species that were endemic to very small areas were disappearing, and species that were quite common were disappearing, and no one could figure out what was going on until finally people realized it was a fungal disease that was just sweeping the world, basically, and the story of the golden frog, which is endemic to Panama and is a really beautiful frog, a bright yellow, sort of taxi cab yellow frog. They actually could predict, based on sort of the way this wave, it was like watching COVID. It was like you could watch this wave go through, and they could predict where it was going to hit, and they knew it was going to hit this region where there's tremendous diversity of amphibian life, and they went through and they collected as many of these frogs as they could of the golden frog, which is very significant symbolically to Panamanians, but also other frogs. And part of that story was actually I got to see a frog. I was one of the only few people who have seen this frog. They found it only in the course of scooping up these frogs. They found a new species of frog. It was a really fascinating species of frog. The males basically raised the tadpoles. They let the tadpoles sort of eat the skin, the sloughed off skin off their backs, and they lived in tree holes. So it was this amazing species, and they collected 3, and I got to see one of them in Panama, and 2 went to Atlanta, to the Atlanta Zoo, and they're all dead now, and they didn't reproduce. So I feel very fortunate to have been one of the few people on Earth to have seen one of these frogs.
Do we believe they're extinct?
Yes.
And
We have pretty good evidence of that because they did record their calls, and so you could tell if they were out there calling. Once again, we don't have complete coverage of the rainforest, but no one has heard that call.
And it sounds so depressing.
It's terribly depressing, and you might have read about it. There was the last one of these frogs. It was called the Rab's fringe-limbed tree frog. It was named after a very sweet guy whom I also got to meet named George Rabb, who's a wonderful conservation biologist. Anyway, he was named Tuffy. He was the last survivor, and he was at the Atlanta, I guess, Botanical Garden. And when he died in, I think it was like 2016, the Times, there was a big deal. The Times wrote about it. It was like an obit.
And we're living in times where terms like extinction are part of our vocabulary. With corals, we have functionally extinct. It seems to me that when you can take a narrow story like the golden frog and tell that story, as opposed to trying to tell the broad story, that's what really hits people to understand what's going on around our Mother Earth here.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that there's this phenomenon of the last member of a species, which is kind of amazing. They're called endlings. They're like the last one that we know of, and there have been several, like George, the tortoise on, I forget which of the Galapagos Islands, but George was the last of his kind, and his death was a huge story. And then there was a tree snail in Hawaii. He was the last of his species. He was also named George after George, and he was the last of his kind, and Tuffy was the last of his kind. So these are stories that, I think one of the weird things about people and humanity, and I'm certainly the same way, is when we get down to those few individuals, we are passionately interested in them. And there are many stories, some of which I have had the privilege of reporting on, of unbelievable efforts to bring back creatures. Some of them remarkably successful when we're down to 5. There's a bird in New Zealand. They were down to 5 individuals, and they have brought that bird back. So we are amazingly good at, when we focus our attention at trying to save these species. Meanwhile, though, all of these things, and we talked about some of these today, dredging and paving over, and we're just every day we're doing all these things that are wiping out millions of creatures. So we're these really weird, contradictory creatures ourselves.
My wife grew up in South Florida, and she never heard the term sunny day flooding. She never heard king tides. That's part of our regular vocabulary these days. You wrote about something that we all live with, and that is what is going on with our environment. What kind of reaction did you get when you wrote about what's going on here? And I want you to reiterate to the audience here, because it bears reminding that this isn't just flowing here or coming down here. We have this direction too. Why is that the case? You even have in your book some suggestion of at least one person's idea of how to seal that off. But explain that.
Yeah, well, you here who live in South Florida, it's a wonderful place, but it's also a geologically very unusual place. This huge sort of platform of coral, reef, basically reef, and it's very porous. And so what you would normally do. And it's another reason South Florida should be really interested in climate change. You're getting water, that the water table is rising. South Florida you're getting your drinking water from this lens of fresh water that's basically pushed upwards, sort of by this salt water pushing in, but some communities are now getting salt water pushing in too far, so drinking water is a huge issue as sea level rises. And this porous rock makes it very difficult. You can't just, build a seawall around South Florida because the water is going to come in from below. And when I reported that story, this guy who used to run one part of the what do you call it? South Florida Water Management District. Thank you. South Florida Water Management said, we get, there's a whammy coming from, the sea level, and there's a whammy coming from increased rain, and there are probably whammies that we haven't even thought of yet. So you're getting water from all sides. It's not a trivial issue. And the other point to make is that the drainage system, as you probably know, is dependent on a certain amount of headroom between the land and the water. And as the sea level rises, that headroom is disappearing. So that's really another huge issue in South Florida.
And it's important to point out, because those that have not gone as deeply as you have in your reporting say, well, if they can do it in the Netherlands, we can do it here. Of course, they're not built on limestone, and they don't have what I would say, 360 degree. The reporting that I've done on that at the time included some chats with a guy who's now the dean here, Ben Kirkman. And so we're going to have Ben come up here and ask maybe a few questions himself. And as he's making his way up here, we chatted before this, and I just thought it was interesting that when a hurricane is coming, and we don't know when it's coming, Ben says that when he puts up his shutters, the whole neighborhood then says, he knows something, we're putting up our shutters. So you know something about what we're talking about here.
Yes, I do. Well, first of all, thank you both, Elizabeth and Kerry. This was a fantastic conversation. I want you to know that Kerry was forced into a suit because I wore a suit today, and he told me he hasn't worn a suit in years, and I told him, my colleagues don't recognize me because I was a t-shirt and shorts guy until I took over this dean job. So we're in the same boat on this, Kerry. I do have several questions, but I also wanted to just go back to Elizabeth's story about leaving science when she took the physics course. I actually am going to guest lecture in a class tomorrow, and I have to cover angular momentum. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, remember that ant. Yeah.
Yeah. But also, when I was a postdoc, I was struggling with research, and I was thinking to myself, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to be a reporter. That's what I wanted to do. So maybe that sort of happened at the same time. I don't know. Conservation of reporters and scientists, right? One of the things in your book that I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about is this notion of environmental things, lakes, oceans, having standing. And to me, that was just when I read that, I was like, this is a radical idea. And I just sort of wondering where you think, you've predicted many of these things through your reporting. Where's that going? Where is the notion that, are the world's oceans going to have legal standing someday?
Well, that was a super fun story to write. It was out of basically Orlando. Orlando County, I guess it is, sort of amazingly voted. It was also a great story of Florida politics, voted a few years ago, it was not that very long ago, to basically give waterways in the county rights. And this was immediately preempted in Tallahassee, because that's the way things work in Florida. But for the brief moment that it existed, and just as an idea, it was such a fascinating idea, I thought. And it is an idea that is sort of gaining global currency. I think there's animal rights, and then there should natural features have rights. So this was waterways, but it could be a mountain, it could be anything. And I think that the idea as an intellectual exercise is, what is the redress for, it all started in the 70s with a wonderful article, which is very easily understood, and you can find it online. It's called Should Trees Have Standing? Should trees be able to basically sue? And it was written by a professor out at a California law school. I can't remember exactly which one. Anyway, but the idea is a really interesting one that we have over time, when you think about it, we have bestowed rights. Kids didn't have rights, women didn't have rights, slaves didn't have rights. We've bestowed rights on more and more groups of people. There's certainly a huge animal rights, movement. You could argue whether it's been successful, but I think for primates, we could argue it's been fairly successful. And is the next step in this sort of expanding world of rights to give natural features rights? And is there any way to preserve nature without doing that, without changing our view of these things as they're just there for us, for our use? And I think it's a really provocative and kind of beautiful idea.
Well, thank you. The one last thing I just wanted to really underscore my thank you for you guys. Here at the university, we feel like we have a commitment to educating the next generation, the citizens of the world. And we view this program of Sea Secrets and the work that you guys do as such a vital collaborator in making sure the next generation are well educated and being able to make decisions about their future that is so important. And so we really are grateful for all of your efforts. That gives us some hope in this time of despair. We want to make sure that we hang on to that hope, so we avoid that inaction that is so easy when there is despair. And the way I encapsulate that in my own head is our responsibility, in collaboration with you, is making sure everyone is environmentally or climate literate. And I think that what you guys do is so important for that, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So I think we have a few moments. We might have a few moments for some questions from the audience. So we'll have some mics that are walking around, and raise your hand and somebody will find you with a microphone. And please ask a question and try not to make just a statement.
Yeah, the economy has a lot of standing these days, and you might think that is adverse to climate, but the transition has now become an economic thing which is unstoppable. And the faster that people make the transition personally, the faster the market grows, and the flywheel of the change to renewables becomes unstoppable. The question is, how do you go about communicating that thing? I mean, we've passed peak oil and peak coal in China. We don't hear anything about that. We're making the transition, not so much here, but it is global warming. So how do you convey that to U.S. people? But
you go to Mar-a-Lago, and I think it's a sort of astonishing, moment that we live in so many different ways. And I think, honestly, without getting too political here, what we're actually seeing out of our own government is this desperate trying to lock in as much fossil fuel infrastructure as possible in as short a time as possible. And that's what's happening right now. I don't think there's any question about that. Now, where does this all end? How long can you perpetuate fossil fuels when, as you say, there are cheaper, and better alternatives out there? Unfortunately, I fear we're going to find out. So, the world, and we're also always always figuring out new ways to use energy, like AI, for example, huge energy suck. So, how is this all going to play out? I don't know. You may be right. Inevitably this transition is going to happen no matter what you do. But the problem is that climate change is cumulative. So every year that we keep burning fossil fuels, we are adding to this problem. And so that is why there's so much urgency to make this transition not in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, but now. So that's the issue.
I would add in there, though, that I think what you're saying, in part with your question, is that economics and capitalism will drive this. And if your fuel cost, if your FP&L bill is cheaper because they didn't have to burn more coal or more gas, which is all that exploration, then it's going to be cheaper. There's a lot of impediments that have been added into the political environment that make this very difficult. So as a reporter, I'm generally not an advocate, but I would reflect what Elizabeth had to say, which is that when you call people and you pester them in Congress, it can cause change. I mean, to me, it's criminal to think that we have this operation of wind power that is close to 90% done, and it was ceased under the premise of a threat to national security up off the coast of New England. And I think we all can look at this and say that just does not make sense. Now they're back, but the Norwegian government, which is the lead investor in the company, had this been held up for another year, this whole thing might have collapsed financially, all based on the whim to somehow stop that. So again, I'm not an advocate, I'm a reporter, but I think that your question is almost the answer.
Be the change you wish to see, that's what Gandhi said. Yeah. It's up to all of us to personally make the change, the transition. That's what makes the market. That's what drives the flywheel.
I'm going to guess the people in this room agree. So,
Elizabeth, thank you for mentioning artificial intelligence, which seems to have exploded suddenly. Is it going to be a tool that helps us solve many of the problems, environmental, climate-related problems we have, or does the fact that it consumes such vast amounts of energy, increasing amounts, going to actually destroy all that possibility and leave us worse off than we were before it hit us?
Well, I want to preface this by saying I am no AI expert. It's using a huge amount of energy. AI is using the energy of Pakistan, basically AI in the U.S. already. It's distorting the electricity market. There's just no doubt about that. Could it be a help to solving our climate change problems? I'm sure it's a very, very, very powerful tool, but you have to use it. You have to want to use it. So right now, as I say, policy is so tilted at this very moment towards, it could also probably help us find more oil and suck more oil out of the ground, So I think that, what we're going to, this is one woman's opinion, okay? But, what you're going to come up with is, AI, is going to be a tool for whatever we decide, and this gets back to politics, we want to do. And if we, want to dig up more fossil fuels, it will help us do that. And if we want to help, if we want to hasten the transition to renewables, it will help us do that. But it's not going to do it on its own. How's that?
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Is there another?
Oh, just really quickly, thanks for being here. It's great to hear this conversation. I'm just curious, what you're reading right now and what people you're paying attention to currently.
You mean journalistically, like who I read? Yeah.
Yeah. Where people, journalists or writers, thinkers. Where are you putting your energy into what you're reading right now and here?
Well, I read.
Influencing you.
I try to read. Once again, personally, I just try to read. Journalists are. A lot of my ideas, I get a lot of my ideas from other people, to be honest. I just am reading stuff and someone mentions something or talks to someone, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. That's so I read pretty broadly. I read several newspapers online every day from different parts of the world. I read all of the climate change sort of newsletters. So those are, and I read a bunch of people on Substack. I always read Bill McKibben. I'm a big Bill McKibben fan. So I don't know where, I don't know if I want to, particularly recommend any one source of news. I guess I recommend trying to read a lot of different voices and sifting through all of those, yeah.
And I will tell you that I'm reading Elizabeth. So I want to thank you for the incredible time you've given us and your insights. We'll say her last name one more time in unison, Elizabeth Kolbert. And we're all going to leave with one word that in the next week we are going to work into conversation. So if you've been listening, I want to see if anybody can say that word right now. Yes. Perfect. So work it into conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much. All of you there, you are invited to a reception inside SALT. And we will see you here back March 10th for Mary Beth Arcodia, who happens to be a professor here now that is also a graduate of the Rosenstiel School and a protege of Dr. Kurtman. So you need to come out and watch her. We'll see you March 10th. Thank you.